When you have obtained the smallest demonstration by means of prayer, you have experienced something that never leaves you. You have the witness of truth within yourself, and this is the only authority worth having.
So, I'm going to be talking about the end of words. So, the end of words, it came first to me. I received midweek a
Center yourself.
how to put it, a prompt for meditation from a Quaker leader. And the one that came this week was a quote from Isaac Pennington. The end of words is to bring us to the knowledge of things beyond what words can utter. And that struck me. I've been doing this series on the mystical experience, or being mystic. And one of the elements that I think the Western culture has particular difficulty with is the idea of an experience that does not fit linear rational thought. I've had that experience in the arts back when I was involved in touring and with artists. There were a couple of artists who did theatrical productions that I called nonlinear. There wasn't a storyline, and you were immersed in this series of experiences, but you weren't told how they all fit. You had to feel that inside yourself. And often enough at the end of a show, I'd hear people complaining, well, there wasn't a storyline. I didn't know what was happening. Well, that was part of the idea. And in the mystical experience, we are, in fact, moving toward a situation where it's the end of words. The end of the words is sort of like coming to the point where you jump off the cliff into something nonlinear, non-rational. And Phyllis the other day mentioned something that St. Francis preached to his followers. And this may not be accurate because I was working from memory from what she'd said. Preach the gospel to the world. If necessary, use words. And that certainly is what the Quakers did. Yes, if you were listening, they would preach to you. But the majority of the changes they wrought in this world came not from words they used, but from the experience others had dealing with a Quaker or with Quakers and their belief in the existence of God within us. So this conversation is not going to be linear. I'm going to be giving you pieces of thought, of information, but I'm not going to try to link them particularly. And I ask that you sort of set aside your attempt to make this rational. Let yourself absorb these pieces and let them speak to you internally. And that may not happen until well after we're done with this session. And that's okay. The divine is eternal. We, in our spirit, are eternal. And we don't have to be able to grasp it immediately or in a way that we can talk about. Several years ago, Claire, one of our people who does not do media, gave a talk about the difference between Eastern and Western religion, that the Eastern Orthodox Church, or Eastern Orthodox Christianity, does not work solely or primarily from a rational or a word-based experience. They talk about something called nous, N-O-U-S, which they regard as the eye of the heart or soul, or the mind of the heart. And one of the sources I read wrote that God created beings with a capacity to receive the Spirit and to attain knowledge of himself. He has brought into existence the senses and sensory perception to serve such beings. Eastern Orthodox Christians hold that God did this by creating mankind with intelligence and with noetic facilities. Noetic, that's an entity that goes beyond human reasoning. Another discussion within the Orthodox community, human reasoning is not enough. There will always remain an irrational residue, in quotes, which escapes analysis and which cannot be expressed in concepts. In other words, it cannot be expressed in words, in rationalness. It is this unknowable depth of things which constitutes the true, undefinable essence that also reflects the origin in God. In Eastern Christianity, it is by faith or intuitive truth that this component of an object's existence is grasped. Now think on that in terms of the Western traditional Christian outlook. Here they are saying it is an intuitive truth coming out of faith that gives us the comfort, the connection with divine existence or with divinity. And then another Orthodox writer says the chief concern of the Orthodox Church is healing of the human soul. And the extension of that is the human soul does not use words. And then there was a sort of comparative. Contemporary Protestants will typically only talk about nous to the extent that they find references to it in Scripture, and then they generally would not spend a lot of time, or any for that matter, trying to understand what the fathers had to say about these passages. Being influenced by American pragmatism, they would also tend to see spending time focusing on the nuances of the mind, heart, and soul of a person to be of little use to the bottom line questions of how one is saved and how we should live our lives, which they tend to see in simple terms and look for more simple answers. And it goes on, this writing, to say, if you were an Eskimo, you would speak about various forms of frozen water with subtle distinctions that would be lost on tribesmen who live near the equator, because those people don't often encounter frozen water. And so hail, snow, sleet, etc. would be seen as pretty much the same thing. Whereas for you, ice, snow, sleet, and all the subtle variations one encounters of those things would be a pervasive reality that would never be far from your thoughts. The saints of the church spent their lives waging spiritual warfare, and so speak about the aspects of the soul in very subtle ways, compared with those who think that if you say a prayer and ask Christ into your heart, then you are saved and couldn't lose your salvation if you tried. That's, if you will, a fairly bleak assessment of a lot of Western Christianity. But it also points out to a weakness that we, at least in this culture, or perhaps Western cultures, have to want to hold on to the certainty of a rational conversation, the certainty of a set of hard rules, which is involved with words. Then Father Rohr chimes in, again from his book on mysticism. To become aware of God's presence in our lives, we have to accept what is often difficult, particularly for people in what appears to be a successful culture. We human beings do not naturally see. We have to be taught to see. We have to learn to see what is there. Or I might say it slightly different. We do not naturally grok. We have to be taught how to intuitively understand. So we do not naturally use our intuitive, non-linear, non-rational facilities. If anything, we tend to be scared about them. We have to be taught by the divine or by experience here on this earth how to connect, how to understand without words. And then we have to understand the divine, what is there, and our being within it and of it. In another writing, he goes back to the original comments that an Orthodox priest had. He said, law will always dominate people who have not experienced that the Spirit blows where it pleases and cannot be controlled by our thoughts and righteousness. Law is the false promise for those who seek to control life from their heads. Now, Emmett Fox, in another book that Phyllis was reading me this morning, talks about the spirit, the soul, being like water. Water has, in its flowingness, no shape, except that which something else contributes to confine it. Our understanding, our relationship with the divine, it can be like ice. We have set it in stone. This is the way it is, which shuts out all opportunity for any nonlinear input. And I think probably all of us have encountered people for whom this was the one way that Jesus Christ wants us to be, or the church wants us to be. And they cannot, will not, are unable to, or unwilling to experience something that is outside that. I am reminded of a fellow I used to work with in advertising who, during one Sunday service in his Catholic church, suddenly found himself flying, looking out of at the world from the eyes of an eagle. You know, to those of us here, we might understand that as a shamanic experience. He saw himself doing that and said, I don't want anything to do with that. Go away. And shut himself off from whatever he was to learn. We do not need to do that. But it takes courage to step into an unknown where we can suss it, we can intuit it, but sussing it, intuiting it, absorbing it, we don't have the same sense of surety in Western culture of, see, it's right here in this book. So going back to Orthodoxy, they have the concept of Noetic Prayer, Noetic being moving beyond the intellect. Noetic Prayer is also called prayer of the heart. You ask if oral prayer can also be called prayer of the heart. If prayer is not pure, neither noetic nor oral prayer can be called prayer from the heart. Prayer of the heart is the prayer where the mind is literally swallowed up by the heart. And this definition is provided by Bishop Aralambos Dionysiatis, who is labeled as a teacher of Noetic Prayer. Those who have Noetic Prayer in their hearts do communicate with one another. In other words, they have the ability to sit together and communicate with one another noetically without speaking. That is, they are able to communicate spiritually. Of course, this also occurs even when such people are far apart. They also can have gifts of clairvoyance or foreknowledge. These are not linear pieces of information, as those of you who give messages or have received messages or do healings. No, we don't work out of linear, let me look in the book and see what I need to do next. We work out of divine inspiration, of hearing divine suggestions, which, at least for me, don't come in words. And that goes on. Through clairvoyance, they can sense other people's sins and thoughts, while foreknowledge enables them to see and talk about subjects, deeds, and events in the future. And that's from Father John Romanides. So consider, as this week unfolds, deciding how much you're going to be open to the non-linear, non-rational, end of words communication with the divine. And you notice that this Orthodox conversation talks about people communicating, whether without words, whether next to each other or distant from one another. And just in the last week, there was a paper came out in one of the physics journals about how they are now managing quantum communications in molecules that are miles and miles and miles distant from one another, completely against all rules of rational physics. So now I want to go back to what we opened with Isaac Pennington, the end of words, slightly different angle. A mystic seeks to arrive at the end of words because words and reason only get in the way of true communication with the divine. And then Father War said something that puts a cap to it. Prayer is not primarily saying words or thinking thoughts. It is rather a stance. It's a way of living in the present, living in awareness of the presence, and even of enjoying the presence. The full contemplative is not just aware of the presence, but trusts, allows, and delights in it. These are the joys of being able to set aside the Western culture's, now this is me talking, not Roar, deep concern with rationality and with words. And the more comfortable you become feeling God's input, hearing God's input without words, the more you're going to understand, the more you'll be at home in the Spirit and of the Spirit, the more you'll be able to live and work in and out of the Spirit, always centered in the Spirit, and following that wonderful divine leading wherever the divine will take you. Dear God, we thank you for having brought us together today, for giving us new understandings, new insights, new connections with you, and helping us to more clearly understand our relationship to you, our connections with one another, the support we can share with one another, the healing work we can do on your behalf. Help us to become good shepherds, not just of our souls and our nous, but help us to be examples to those who pass by us, pass near us, pass through our lives. As St. Francis says, let us be good examples to preach your love without words. We thank you for guiding us as we depart from here, helping us to be in the place to do what we need to do or experience what we need to experience, so we can move ever closer to you, become an ever closer example of your love active in this world. And we thank you, dear God, for guiding our feet as we depart from here and guiding us back again for next week and the weeks to come. We give you full thanks for the good that you've brought into our lives. We acknowledge your power and give you the gratitude. We say thank you, thank you, thank you, and amen.